everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of the Road to the ProcureTech Cup. Today's a special day. It's on Halloween this year, which we didn't have last year. So we've got a bunch of tricks and treats ready for you if you celebrate, and if you don't, well, we'll give them access to you anyways. So don't worry about that. Today we've got BeNeering on the show, who's coming to discuss how to create a business case for intake and orchestration solutions, which are all the rage these past few years in the procurement technology space. So I'm very happy to have you with us. If you're watching the replay, that's great too. Just want to give you a little bit of housekeeping here before we start. So we are on the 5th episode of the show. We had ConversionIS come talk to us about suites and end-to-end platforms last week. And so there's a bit of crossover because as we discussed last week, and we'll get into again today, there's a great convergence happening between those two spaces, no pun intended. And then next week, we'll get into SRM architecture with Trust Your Supplier and keep going until April of next year with all these different solution categories and different topics of how to make you successful with procurement technology after you've signed on that dotted line with your provider. So that being said, quick agenda here. We're going to look at what is an intake and orchestration platform, make sure we define terms before getting into the topic. Then BeNeering and Natalia from BeNeering will come on and present the company and why we should be listening to them in this particular solution category as a solution category champ. And then we'll get into the meat of the discussion on how you should be thinking about building business cases for intake and orchestration. But having seen the framework that Natalia is going to present, I could tell you it's a lot wider than that in terms of applicability. And so we'll look at the 5-level business case framework, which I just love. And we'll have a case study to illustrate as well. And then we'll wrap it up and let you guys go collect your treats if you celebrate this evening. And if you're tuning in from Europe or EMEA, really appreciate you being here live. And otherwise, of course, there's always the replays to watch. So let me, just before we get into this market map here, let me just bring in Natalia to introduce yourself. Thanks, Natalia, for being here on a Friday night from Europe. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Joel. Thanks for inviting us. Shall I say a couple of words about myself?
Yeah, sure.
So, Natalia Parmenova, I'm Chief Revenue Officer at BeNeering, joined the team 2 years ago. And before, I was for 18 super happy and long years at SAP, managing some of very large SAP customers like Philip Morris International, like Rolex, Airbus, and others. And happy to be here today.
Great. And yeah, I did a lot of SAP in my day as well. And I always find it's a great school for the IT space in general. And so I'm looking forward to what you'll be sharing with us today. So before we get into the actual discussion on business cases, let's take a second here just to look at it through the lens of my ProcureTech market map. So you have it in the middle here, right? And it's always been something that we've needed to do as procurement professionals and as IT professionals supporting procurement, but it's sort of become its own solution category over the last couple of years, right? Intake management and process orchestration. And so it sits in the middle of what is your classic, technology stack from spend analysis, category management, sourcing, contract management to procure to pay and accounts payable, right? To actually get stuff bought and or on contract and then purchased from a replenishment standpoint in the day-to-day, and supports as well supplier relationship management, which is onboarding, performance management, risk management, offboarding. But it sits in the middle where it's orchestrating. You're probably not on a single tool set for your entire business for all of these other processes. And so you have stakeholders, you have systems, and you have processes that need to be coordinated through that entire life cycle, or those two life cycles that we have on the top and the bottom. And so I define intake and orchestration as the end-to-end process of capturing, routing, and managing requests, procurement requests across an organization's people, processes, and systems. And we've been doing that for decades, right? It's just we've got this technology that offers us the ability to do that in a more concentrated fashion. And on that note, Natalia, I don't know if you have the same definition, and I know we'll get into it in a second, but I'd love for you to discuss who BeNeering is and before we get into debating that definition.
Yes, thank you, Joel. We park the debate for a second. Now I wanted to just briefly introduce BeNeering. since maybe you don't know much about it, even if the company exists already for almost 20 years. So we were started in 2007 by also ex-SAP solution architect, and our overall mission is to complement ERP, which every company has, like a little elephant in the room, to complement ERP with procurement solutions. So we don't really play too much with definitions. We are just looking into customer problems and developing digital tools for them. So today, BeNeering is a happy team of very experienced and very young people. We are about 65 in 2 locations. Our main country is Germany, and we are delivering our solutions for about 45 customers. So among our customers are very, very large multinationals like BASF, Deutsche Telekom, but also smaller companies like Miltenyi Biotech that is developing super fast, like SICK sensors, and super cool customers like University of Aachen or Clinics of Köln. What is special about BeNeering? Quite a bit of scenes actually. Maybe we stay on a previous one for a sec. So first of all, we are a private company. We have no investors, no banks, no PEs. We are fully financed from our own revenue, so super stable. And we are growing 28, 29% year over year. So really super successful. And something super special is that we are developing all our solutions, all our modules and functionality in co-innovation with customers. So there's nothing that we develop just out of our own fantasy. And that makes us relatively special in the market.
I would agree, right? And I think that's maybe why, like, just from my own perspective, like I've only learned to know you since last year's ProcureTech Cup, and so it's been wonderful to discover, you know, your history and the deep expertise as well that you have in terms of the SAP ecosystem and how to bring value to that. But what kind of issues, you know, you referred to those earlier. What type of issues are you focusing on at BeNeering?
Yeah, we will be talking a lot about the connection between issues and the results, and I'm firmly convinced that before you are trying to achieve something, you should understand your problem, right? So this small slide shows how we see the universe of indirect procurement and the complexity of this universe. So first of all kinds of people are customers of indirect procurement, all kinds of departments from finance to logistics to marketing to MRO and so on. And all of them have different needs and requirements in goods, but also in services. All these goods and services obviously can be coming from completely different buying channels that should be managed also differently. And obviously, every company has purchasing policies that people want to automate as much as possible, and nobody wants to learn 100 pages procurement policy document. And the last piece, again, I call it elephant in the room, is your ERP, which nobody super likes, but that cannot be ignored with all the master data, supplier data, transactional data, workflows, and so on. So our approach to digitalization, however you call it, is to try to address all these 5 topics in equal attention, let's put it this way, so that everything is taken into account when we are automating something.
Yeah, and so I think it kind of gives more concrete examples to what I was discussing earlier around people, processes, and systems, right? And so is solution, or is intake and orchestration in your mind the solution to the problem of coordinating all of this together?
I already kind of just made an impression that I'm not too keen on specific definitions, but rather into what kind of problem we are trying to address. And if you think about BeNeering, we are trying to look at this whole problematic that we were just discussing from a perspective of the requester. And I like this analogy with modern airport. So when we are coming today to the airport, essentially we are using 3 machines before we get through the security. We don't talk to anybody anymore. We print our boarding pass if we didn't do it online. we print our baggage tag, and we give our luggage, and that's it. On one side, you can say, yes, this is a self-service. Who likes self-services? Well, actually, I do like this self-service. When I go to Frankfurt airport, it takes me exactly 1.5 minutes, the whole process. I don't talk to anybody. I'm not facing with somebody's mood. I'm not staying in line. It takes like almost no time. It's super intuitive. So me, as a requester, in this case, I'm super happy. And that's what BeNeering is trying to do, to look at the universe of indirect procurement from the requester perspective, so that requesters can do as much as possible themselves, but again, in compliance and in accordance to everything what the company wants them to do.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to highlight, right? Like, you don't get past that security gate unless you've met all the requirements and are compliant with them, right? But to your point, it's marrying that with the user experience for sure.
Yeah, so this is just a quick preview how BeNeering UI is looking, super intuitive, super simple to navigate, and the users always start in our philosophy in a search field. They don't even need to know what channel these goods or services are coming from. They just type happily, and then our search engine is doing the job of directing the people to the right place. Since we don't have enough time, we provide a couple of videos for you to look actually at how BeNeering is built. When we are thinking about the requester, the question might come, what actually it does for the company, what it does actually for procurement and for IT. And our philosophy, the second part of it, is that when the requesters are happy and they can do most of the things themselves, it should bring a lot of benefit also to procurement. First of all, the whole philosophy of no-touch requisitions, we have taken this to the art. Basically, for the most part, 90% is a lot. It can be 70, 80, depending on your industry, but you can achieve a lot of PRs not even being touched by procurement, because everything is done compliant and everything is done in accordance with the company rules. And at the same time, obviously, it's super important to keep costs under control. So the focus on optimal TCO is also part of our philosophy.
Yeah, and I feel like, well, we'll get to it in a second here. I know I'll let you finish first.
Yeah, so basically, just to illustrate how BeNeering is driving the user through different buying channels, as I said, the user always starts in the search field and should even have no idea about the buying channel. And what our system does, first of all, it starts looking through the standard structured channels, because that's what you want in procurement. You want people to buy as much as possible from catalogs, on marketplaces that you allow, from operational contracts, from preferred suppliers, from stock. You don't want them to create immediately free text requests only to find out later that actually it was in a standard channel. So we have a super strong universal search that helps users to find fast things through all kinds of standard channels. And then if this does not help, our AI intake assistant is also capable of tapping into your purchase order or invoice history to help people find things that were bought once, but not upgraded to a catalog, still to help find the right supplier or find the right contract. And for me, the whole free text is the last resort. So basically, if nothing is really found through the standard channels or in pure history, we have an AI assistant that helps people to complete free texts. But here again, we are making a big step, because we are helping the users to assemble all the data, so that by the time this free text reaches procurement, all compliance checks are already done and all the necessary data is already in, like cost centers, like material group and other crazy things that normal requesters don't know, and procurement is struggling completing after they get such requests.
Yeah, and I love like in the SAP world, I always say like you don't want to have to teach your requesters to speak Japanese to be able to buy something, right? Like you said, material groups and all these items that or data objects that if you're a requester that doesn't know what SAP is, you don't know what all these other things are either, right? And so let's dive into the topic here with the business case building. But just before you did that, you referred to it earlier, Natalia. There are 3 public demos here. I asked for 1, they gave me 3, so you get 3 for 1 today. I promised some treats. So if you want to see pre-recorded demos for these types of functionalities here, you can pause and check the QR codes or as you're watching the replay. So I'll leave these up just for a second here, and let's get into the actual meat of the discussion on how you should be building your business case for intake and orchestration. And I mentioned the convergence and the fact that we had these source to pay suites. Now we have these new intake and orchestration providers. In your case, Natalia, you've kind of been in the intake and orchestration space for a long time, right on top of SAP for indirect goods and services. So how do the convergence to me is like, this is all becoming the same thing from a software category standpoint, right? It's more, how do we think about starting with your problem first? And so I'd love your perspective, Natalia, on how people need to think about this.
Yes, thanks, Joel. So I just wanted to make a small disclaimer or a small explanation before we dive into our 5 levels methodology. When I think about business cases, I think about the story of somebody wanting to lose weight, going to the gym, right? And for some person, for example, person on the left, losing 1 kilo would be a huge achievement, right? For somebody like poor person on the right, losing 5 kilos would be not enough. And that's how I always think about business cases. So when you start saying they achieved this ROI, or they achieved this savings, or they managed to optimize so many FTEs, I'm always thinking, how fat were they before, right? And that's why when you are trying to compare yourself with some other companies or trying to compare different business cases, you really always need to think about where were you when you were starting, or where were people when they started this. So I think it's a big disclaimer, and I think it's a big warning sign. Maybe you will remember this funny picture when you think about or build your business cases, or somebody will be telling you, oh, I lost 10 kilos, but maybe you 120 kilos before, right? So basically not a big deal, right? So
and
that's
could I take your analogy further just by saying, like, and people have different metabolisms, right? And so they have different IT setups today, interface problems, or maybe they're a global organization, maybe you're a local one, right? So there's all these starting point considerations of your current state that can massively influence whether a case study or something else is applicable to your context or not. So I think it's a great analogy to use to illustrate that.
Yeah, so basically I'm going from a bit of fun to a bit more serious level. So we at BeNeering are using this business case plus, I call it framework, and it essentially consists of 5 levels. Here on the screen you see 3 first levels, and we'll be speaking about the other 2 just in a minute. But let's start from how it really happens normally. Your typical starting point is not ROI. You are not starting building your story or justifying your project on level 1. So you usually are starting on a level that I call value drivers, which basically should calculate into ROI, or even you are starting at so-called value levers, right? And it maybe will take a little bit of a time to understand what is the difference between value drivers and value levers. I gave here some examples, and let's maybe go through one of them. So basically, one of the value drivers can be diminished requisition creation time. What does it turn into? It turns into freeing up time from people. So basically, you can easily calculate it into ROI. I'm not talking about getting rid of FTEs, but basically, when people spend less time on requisitions, they can spend time on their job, on marketing, on engineering, on whatever, right? So this is a value driver, and it can be uplifted into a number, right? What this value driver is driven by? It can be driven, for example, by automated compliance checks, right? So basically, when you are creating your requisition, you can create it faster if the compliance checks are automated, right? You can create it faster if you are using standard buying channels instead of typing free text, right? So this is a bit of a difference between value drivers and value levers. And I recommend everybody to spend a bit of time when you are building your business case, think really about level 2 as a thing that you can calculate into ROI, and level 3 is more enablers to drive these value drivers.
Mhm.
And
Can I ask you a question? Like, I find for the value drivers, especially for procurement transformation projects, it usually lines up to one of three, which is, FTE, so time, right? Time savings and a given activity, purchase price savings or cost savings, and then the third one is risk that can be translated into dollar amounts as well, right? If I diminish the likelihood of a risk, then I can put a price to that in terms of, it's going to cost me less to mitigate that risk over time. Do you see any other big ones I'm missing? Or does that cover most of them?
It covers most of them. Most of them I put into ROI. A third point with just a funny human word, happiness. You can
Yes.
call it employee satisfaction. You can call it overall efficiency. I do believe that happy employees who are doing things intuitively are doing their job better, right? And at the end of the day, it comes as money to the company. So I think this aspect. Different companies take it differently, but at the end of the day, as I said, happy employee does a better job, brings more money to the company. So that's also an aspect that I would not ignore.
Yeah, and you could flip it and look at it as a retention risk as well, right? But that's a great one to highlight for sure. Cool. So now there's these two other levels that you've piqued our curiosity on. Well, how do these two fit in?
Yeah, I think what is important apart from this, so we already established that ROI is not enough, right? That you need to potentially start by value drivers, check them against the value levers, and only then calculate your ROI. But I think what also is very, very important is what I call here functional enablers and architectural contributors. Because when we are building a business case, obviously it's all driven around certain digital tools, right? I mean, we are not in our business, we are normally having a business case and we are choosing a software. And I think it's super important to map value drivers and value levers to functional enablers, right? So basically, if we are trying to improve quality of free text requests, what is in this software that we are looking into is going to help us exactly, right? Which functionality does it actually have a functionality to improve quality of free text requests? For example, how does it help? For example, it helps with the data suggestions, or it helps by doing universal search and diminishing number of free texts, or it helps by collecting data from internet. So I think functional enablers is something that is important to also list and map, as I said, to every value driver. And then obviously behind functional enablers is technology, right? So how can we do data suggestions from SAP? For example, in case of BeNeering, we can do it because we have real-time data exchange with SAP. Basically, this is the reason. And real-time data exchange is our architecture, is part of our structure. For example, how do we do it simple for people to complete free text requests? Because we have a very solid AI stack, because we have a very solid intake assistant. So this type of things, I think it's important when you build a business case, and especially if you want it to be approved, to look at all these aspects.
Yeah, and one of the things I love from this, it's because it resonates so hard, because I remember in a past life implementing a source to pay suite module, right, for procure to pay, and wanting wanting access to inventory data, and it wasn't real time, right? And so all the time people were requesting things, but it was only loaded once a day, and so they were requesting inventory that was no longer there, and it just created all sorts of problems, right? But the business case itself probably looked a lot like your level 1, 2, 3, but we didn't have that link with the architectural contributor that was having a massive impact on our ability to realize that business case, right? So when I saw your framework, I was going like, oh yes, this makes the link between them. And secondly, it allows all the different stakeholders to speak a common language, right? Because IT will probably be looking at that level 5, procurement's going to be looking at level 4, the executives are going to be looking at level 1, and it's often hard to speak the same language, right? And so I think if you're able to draw those links between ROI and architectural contributors, then you're able to show executives why a certain a certain thing or a certain functionality not being met in the RFP, even though they might look at 98, they might cover 98% of what you need, is going to severely affect your ability to deliver on the business case, right? So I love this way of looking at it. And I know we have a couple more minutes here where you wanted to kind of illustrate with an example.
Yeah, we don't have actually much time, but essentially that's what we are trying to do with all of our customers, is to map this whole story from L1 to L5. And let me maybe run you through just one of the lines in this example. So obviously, as we already said, level 1 ROI procurement FTE savings. So basically, the company that is mentioned in this case, they managed to save almost 30% per FTE on doing different things, and they will be below. And these 30% people started spending on more stakeholder management and more supply evaluation, supply management. So basically, like doing more value-adding stuff. How did they save these FTEs? Well, one of the drivers was that free text requests were decreased by 20%, which means that procurement didn't have to spend time on these 20% requests, and plus the processing time also was reduced. Well, why it was happening? So what was the lever? First of all, the processing and the rework was much less because of the quality improvement, right? So the quality of the free text improved, and also they took some decisions and started spending less time on approvals, also because there were less free text and more standard buying channels, right? So these were the levers. And then when we speak about functional enablers, essentially one of them was that we provided them with one search field, so universal search and AI assistant that is guiding users to different standard items, also including services and contracts and preferred suppliers. So that was driving essentially diminution of the free text, or especially false free text. And architecturally, essentially, BeNeering is built in a way that we can cover any buying channel. And that's why it was possible to unite everything, not only vanilla flavor catalogs, for the users in one system. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to stop here. And
and it's okay if we go over a couple minutes here. And I think we can probably, Jackson had a good question, right? Which is, let's go straight. Thanks for sharing. In your view, what are the unique elements specific to intake and orchestration that you could pick out in this framework? Some of these can apply to any other S2P suite or module. And I think we mentioned that at the outset, but I'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah, I have had time with definitions, as I said. I mean, we try to stick to the real life. I mean, you have requesters in your company. However you call the solution, you are trying to automate and digitalize their life, right? So let's call it a crocodile, right? For the simplicity. And basically, from this perspective, when you look at your real life, all of these levers are relevant.
Yep. And I think, to Jackson's point, and we kind of touched on this earlier as well, is I feel like these solution categories are merging, where you have intake and orchestration providers increasingly suggesting functional module capabilities, and you have the source to pay suite providers coming out with their intake and orchestration functionality. And so, the definitions mean less and less over time. It's more, to Natalia's point, what problem are you trying to solve, right? And so if in a business case, it's free text requisitioning is one of your big issues, then that's, in the intake process, right? But orchestration might be, once we have the information for that free text, where does it go? It always is jamming in legal or in IT, right? And we don't have the visibility. And so that's more of an orchestration problem across processes and systems. So thank you for the question. I think we may have another question, which I'll answer in the chat after the show here, just to be conscious of time. So as a recap, we mentioned it, right? But the convergence in my mind is underway. So all the big players, platform players, end-to-end platform players are converging in terms of functionality slowly. And so you could potentially address the same business problem with different types of solution categories. And so it's important to be conscious of that as you're navigating the market. The second piece, we mentioned it about 2-3 times too, is defining the problem and not the tool, right? So given the convergence, be clear on what are the value drivers, where are the pain points? Because we didn't mention that, but I feel like you're level 2 and 3, Natalia, you're often driven by where is the pain in the business today, right? What's taking a long time? What's super painful to get done? And that's where, actioning those value levers will give you a lot more value, and you can seek partners out to help you solve for them. And then the last point is decomposing the business case, right? What it does is it allows you to remember what's important fundamentally to reach that ROI. And it also helps you communicate effectively to all your different stakeholders, regardless of what level they're at and what language they speak, so to speak. So on that note, if you want to keep going, following the season here, everything culminates in April with the virtual conference, which we'll be selling tickets to in a couple weeks. But you can follow me with the Pure Procurement newsletter. So you just scan the QR code and you have the updates every week around what the new show is, what the old show was. And we also have another pieces of content that are interesting for procurement professionals who want to leverage technology. And Natalia, I know you wanted to share as well a resource for folks who are interested in learning more.
Yes, yeah, you can download our small use case library, but most importantly, please, if you have questions or if you want to discuss your specific situation, just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Very good, very good. Yeah, Natalia's it's always a good discussion. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Natalia. I really appreciate it, especially on a Friday night in Europe on Halloween, dedicated to the show and the cause. So I very much appreciate that, and I will let you go. And for everybody who's watching on the live stream, appreciate you. We'll tune in again next week for the first of our SRM shows, or supplier relationship management shows around business cases and architectures. And we'll see you again soon. Have a great weekend, everybody.